You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
That's like a risk worth taking in my book. And I feel like that's the whole reason to get into film distribution or filmmaking, is to take those kind of risks. Because, you know, you don't want to just like throw your, you know, like kind of just be like another voice among like a, you know, chattering crowd of thousands of people doing the same thing. It's like, you know, ideally, like you'd want to stand out in a positive way and, you know, kind of be like a beacon in a sense of for like what's possible.
Hey everyone, thanks again for hitting that play button. This is episode 87 of the Dave Bullis Podcast. Just a quick heads up, on Thursday, December the 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, social media expert Madeline Scalar and I are going to be co-hosting a blab, which is all about film marketing. For those who don't know Madeline, she's a Twitter marketing expert, and she's also the host of the Tweet Smarter podcast. There's a link in the show notes that'll take you right to the event page for the blab, and for those who don't know what blab is, it's just like Periscope. It's connected to Twitter. It lets you chime in, and you can actually be a part of the conversation. So you can ask questions at any time, and it's a lot more interactive. So again, this will be the first time I'm ever doing it, so bear with me if I screw up a little bit, which I probably will. And if you can't make the show, I'll be uploading it to YouTube and as a special bonus episode of this podcast. So for today on the podcast, we have Brad Wilke. Brad is a screenwriter of Camel Spiders and Paraconda. Brad holds an MBA from the University of Washington's Foster School of Business, as well as a Master of Communication and Digital Media from the University of Washington's Department of Communication. Brad is also the co-founder of Smart House Creative, a company that designs and executes digital and social media strategies for films and filmmakers. We talk about how to build an audience for your project, how to network, and working with the legendary Roger Corman. I've added links to everything in the show notes. So if you go to davebullis.com, I've even added a whole bunch of extra show notes. That's everything from crowdfunding to crowdfunding, some really cool social media links, and it's all in there. So if you are planning on, you know, building a social media following or building an audience for your film, it's all in there. So thanks for listening, everybody, and I hope to see you on Thursday.
You're listening to the Dave Bullis Podcast.
Brad, how are you, sir?
Oh, not bad, Dave. Thanks a lot. Great to be here.
Oh, I thank you very much for coming on, Brad. Brad, it's a question I always ask everyone to get started is, how did you get started in the film business?
Yeah, well, it was a pretty winding path that I took. I went to West Point, of all places, so I was in the Army for 5 years after I graduated in 1998. So that's how I ended up out here in the Pacific Northwest at Fort Lewis. And during my time at Fort Lewis, I, would spend a lot of nights and weekends up in Seattle. This was before social media and before a lot of, so much, like everything was on the web. So, just going to a lot of like film screenings and just connecting. Like I was interested in film, but didn't really know that it was like a career path necessarily, even though I'd made a lot of short like VHS movies as a kid growing up with neighborhood friends. So, ended up making a short film here in Seattle. I shot it on 16 millimeter and edited it on a Steenbeck. So would, spend my day down at Fort Lewis in the Army and then come up here at night and, edit old school style and then drive back down to Fort Lewis. So that kind of got, my feet wet in the business. And, I really enjoyed that. And the short film, did okay on the festival circuit and, led to another one. And then I made, and then it just kind of blossomed from there. Like I ended up doing some pre-screening for the Seattle International Film Festival, and then came on board as a programmer, which is not a full-time job by any stretch. Just FYI, anybody out there. Yes, you can make a living as a programmer, but it's those kind of jobs are few and far between. So it's definitely a labor of love. And Also had been, continuing to write screenplays and ended up working through just literally a cold email that I sent to Jim Wynorski early one morning when I was like on the verge of giving up screenwriting for good. I was just, it was one of those like moments, you're staring into the abyss, and and it turned out, it was great. And that's turned into a really fruitful writing relationship with Jim. And, and then Smart House started because I got laid off. Like I during all of that was happening, I had started a nonprofit when I got out of the Army, which led me to business school, which is something I never thought that I would be doing. And from there, I got a kind of a concurrent degree, Masters of Communication in Digital Media, which really laid the groundwork for a lot of the work we do at Smart House, and was working for a pretty large global health nonprofit here in Seattle as their digital engagement strategist, and got laid off at a round of budget cuts, and that hit only the external relations. So they lost 40% of their web team, and I was part of that. And that's really where I, was just sort of like wondering what, I have 2 kids, what am I going to do now? And I was like, well, I love movies. I, have a fair amount of knowledge about business and digital strategy and, that world. And I program, like all these things. And so I just was like, well, how can I combine those? And that's kind of really how Smart House got off the ground, along with, my business partner, Ryan Davis. Like she, wasn't just like I had started my own smaller company, and then we decided to join forces because, she is a publicist and I'm not. So it was kind of like a match made in film marketing heaven. So that's kind of like, in a nutshell, kind of how things progressed.
It's amazing you went to West Point, because I actually used to help out a social media group that was connected to West Point.
No kidding.
Yeah, they were called like the Delco Friends of West Point. They found me randomly on the internet one day, and they were like, "Could we meet with you to discuss a social media strategy?" And they were just, we went over everything, and they would show me videos of West Point and all this other stuff, and it was actually pretty fascinating, a lot of the stuff we went over. So it's actually, again, like I always say, through this interview, through all these podcasts, I always say it's such a small world.
Oh yeah, it really is, and especially, it's what's really interesting is, just kind of on the topic of West Point, there are very few West Point graduates, I guess. I was thinking of cadets, I forgot what to call them momentarily, old grads, as we're called, who are involved in the film industry. So, and I feel like I'm very fortunate to know, as far as I know, like almost all of them who are doing stuff, and they're doing some great stuff. Sean Mullen just wrote and directed Amira and Sam, which came out through Draft House, and there's a couple other guys. One of them was working on Army Wives as a staff writer, and people are doing some really cool stuff. Another friend of mine that was actually my classmate, Nick Palmisano, he just directed, after raising a pretty large sum of money on Indiegogo, kind of like a zombie thriller set, I believe, at a military base firing range with his company. It's called Ranger Up. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing that. But it's like I can kind of count like alumni and former graduates who are in the entertainment industry. So it's even smaller world as you get lower and lower into the weeds there.
Ranger Up sounds pretty good because one problem I've always had with zombie movies, Brad, is the zombie apocalypse. It happens. There's an outbreak. There's a group of survivors that are protagonists. We follow them. Well, the first time they pick up a gun, they're crack shots. They're hitting headshots from 1,000 yards away. Oh, you want that zombie? Bam! I'm thinking to myself, that is an amazing shot for a top marksman, and this person's just randomly, picking up, a shotgun and hitting, So I imagine in Ranger Up, if they're actually good at shooting zombies in the head, there's a good reason for it now.
Yeah, right. That's a great point. And military people are some of the most critical when it comes to, films that involve the military, especially with, one of the scripts that I wrote for Roger Corman with Jim Wynorski, Camel Spiders. The protagonist is a captain in the Army who's back from Afghanistan, and everybody's like, pointing out like problems with his uniform and all these things, and and blaming the screenwriter. Like I should never go on IMDb message boards. Like it actually, like it kind of gave me like a very, very, if my skin wasn't thick enough being in the film industry to begin with, it got a lot thicker real quick after that movie came out, and everything, like, the screenwriter probably has no idea what it's like. And here I am, like an Army veteran, who went to West Point, and I don't have any control over that. Like a lot of times, like the screenwriter gets the blame when things aren't right, and never gets the credit when things are right. So screenwriting, anybody who's listening, is sometimes a very thankless profession.
Very true, Brad. Very true. I mean, I've had friends who've worked on like martial arts movies as like stunt coordinators, for instance, or fight choreographers, and when the movie comes out, some of their friends are like, "Wait a minute, what is going on here? Why are they throwing? Why is this grappler wrestler guy throwing punches?" And he's like, "Look, that's what the director wanted. It's out of my hands."
Yep, exactly. It's so true. It's so true.
So, Brad, I wanted to talk to you. You mentioned working with Roger Corman, on a project. How did you end up, getting to work with Roger?
Well, so I was working with Jim Wynorski for a project that was executive produced by Roger Corman. So I got script notes and stuff, but I live in Seattle. So this is an interesting kind of scenario for screenwriters who don't live in, Los Angeles or even New York City. So what happened was I was watching, I've been a big fan of B movies for my whole life. Like I grew up watching some of Jim Wynorski's very films, like Deathstalker 2 and Chopping Mall and Not of This Earth, like fun, kind of classic B movies, right? And one night in like 2010, or maybe it was 2009, like the fall, like October of 2009, it was before I went to business school, and I was kind of like at a low point. Like I was, living with my current, my wife now, but we were, not engaged. Like, it was kind of like, what am I doing with my, like, I don't know what's going on. And it was kind of in this like binge watching period of horror films from Netflix and just whatever. Right. So I got Chopping Mall one night, and I had seen it before. So I was going to watch it with I'd seen it multiple times, but it's one of Jim's, used to be called Killbots, and it's kind of like a RoboCop in a mall.
I've seen that movie. I have I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I usually have like a bad movie marathon, and Chopping Mall is one of the films I always put in there.
Yeah.
And some people get it, and some other people are like, what the hell is going on here? They're security guard robots, or
Yeah. It's great. And the backstory, behind that is, I won't go into all of it, but, Jim kind of made it, in a very short period of time in evenings. Like they were shooting in the mall that they shot Fast Times at Ridgemont High in when it was closed at night. And then they had to be out of there by the morning. And, it was produced by Julie Corman, and Roger didn't know that Jim was making it. Like it was this like really, really funny story, kind of like the, like the golden age of like the 80s, kind of like anything goes filmmaking. But anyway, so I listened to it with Jim's commentary, and I was like, man, this guy seems like a really smart guy. Like, seems like a nice guy. Like I should wonder what he's doing now. Like I didn't know like he had been like, continuously working since like 1983 or something like that, and churning out a lot of some good, some the jury's out. I don't want to say bad, but multiple films a year. So I looked him up on IMDb Pro, and I kind of had this idea in my back of my mind. I was just like, I'm just going to write him an email, and I don't know what I'm going to say, but I'm going to write him an email. So anyway, so I did that, and sure enough, on IMDb Pro, his contact information is right there, on his like profile, and I was like, okay, I guess that's some sort of sign. I don't know exactly what, and so, and also like I was not drinking or high at the time. This was all done. It was just really late, so I tapped out an email, and then I that morning I kind of reread it and just, kind of said like, I've been a fan of your films for a while, and, I'm actually a screenwriter, and, I've had some scripts that have placed in contests, but, just nothing's ever really clicked with, I can't remember exactly what I wrote, but, I said, if you need a second set of eyes on something, or, a project that needs, to go from idea to, treatment or whatever, let me know. I'm your man. And, I just had no I'd never done it before either. So I had no expectation of what the outcome would be. I was just like, well, why not? Right. Nothing to lose. Like I was, like I said, on the verge of just throwing in the towel. Cause if you're writing without an agent or a manager, it can often feel like you're just kind of writing in a vacuum, and, your family might read something or, but nobody really cares, honestly. And, the next day, I think it was, got an email back from him, saying hey, thanks for the email. Seemed like a smart guy, well-written email. I'll give you a call. So we ended up talking, either later that day or the next day, in very short order, and had a really good conversation. Jim's no matter what you would say about his films, I've never, and I didn't even know the half of it, but he's just a really, really smart film person. He just knows how movies work, and he loves movies. And so we, kind of talked for a period after I got out of the Army, I had worked at Scarecrow Video here in Seattle, which is sort of a, pantheon of, movie geeks. So I could kind of hold my own with him. And he's like, all right, so here's what I'm going to do. I don't know, I like you. It seems like you're smart enough or whatever. And, I'm going to send you the script. It needs a lot of work to get a green light from Roger. How he talks he's more it needs a lot of work to get a green, he kind of talks really, really gruff. And he's like, so I'm going to send it to you, give it a read. And then I want you to rewrite the first 10 pages. And here's the stuff I want you to concentrate, focus on this, this needs to be punched up. This needs to, he's like, take your time, because we'll only give you one chance. And he's like, send it back to me. And if I like it, you can rewrite the whole, you can basically, get it into fighting shape. And then, I'll give you, credit and, blah, blah, all this stuff. Right. And so, okay. So sends me the script, and it was camel spiders. And, I read it and thought about it and spent basically a week, trying to fix or improve the first 10 pages. And then I did, and then I sent it back to him. And then, pretty shortly after that, he, calls back, and I didn't have his number in my phone at this, so I just saw it was the same. I was like, oh, well, boy, this is it, right? I was like, here's the call, right? This could make or break my, fledgling career, whatever there is of it right now. And I was so used to rejection and everything that it was such a shock when he's like, Brad Wilke, Jim Wynorski, loved it. He just it was really just he's very blunt. If he doesn't like something, I've heard a lot of times from him, he'd be like, nope, hate it, fix it, change it. And, you just learn, it's just you don't take it personally. You just really, it's a kind of a professional, it's just okay, let's, adjust here. What we're going to do. So anyway, he liked it. And, so he, so I ended up, rewrite. And then, from that, so I went down to set, and, I have a little cameo in the film, and, got to, kind of experience that world of on the fly filmmaking. But even better, I think more importantly, it really taught me how to write to a budget without losing any creativity. And, a lot of times, people would love to have, I just told this story to somebody earlier today who, because I don't usually bring this stuff up in conversation, but sometimes, people will know about it and say well, how did you, tell me about that. And so anyway, I was just telling this very exact story earlier about how there was a scene where it was a busload of tourists get attacked by the camel spiders. And, it wasn't essential to the story, but it had a point. There was a reason it was there to move the story forward. And, the first thing that Jim did when you read that new scene was no, can't do it. I got to get a bus. I got to get at least 20 extras. I got to put them up for a day. I got to feed all of them. I got, he's like, do something else. Take it out, figure out a different, So it was it was kind of this boot camp on, writing effective, low budget, genre pieces. And, from there, then, I pitched Piranaconda. So ended up doing 3 different treatments, and they all got rejected, which was really frustrating. And then came on to do some uncredited rewrites. Jim wanted, and I don't even know if that was because my second child was, or my first child was being born at the time. So like I was supposed to go out to set, but, you know, and I say this, like, I don't regret it at all, not going out to set, but, you know, so I don't know, like if, you know, so it was just like, it was like such a, like, I was kind of a bit of a letdown in that sense. Like I really wanted to like be more involved in that project because, you know, it was my, you know, and I, you know, thankfully, because like, I feel like I've only ever had handshake deals with Jim, you know, I did get, you know, concept and, you know, credit and, you know, all that, you know, like the, you know, like the credit for it. And, you know, that's great, but I wanted to do more hands-on writing. And then, you know, since then, Jim and I have, you know, co-written probably at least 3 other like full screenplays, none of which have been produced, but all were like on the docket, were going to happen. And then for whatever reason, you know, funding fell through on one, something, you know, something else got, you know, a slate got, you know, it was kind of like just the typical reasons movies never get made. So, but each time I learned something, you know, it was a really great experience. And, you know, the movies are low budget creature features, but I feel like from a writing perspective, you know, they were invaluable experiences. And I really, you know, to this day, you know, and I'm sure like, you know, Jim probably will never even listen to this screenplay or this podcast, but even if I send it to him and I say, listen, you know, I probably like won't get around to it. So I'm saying this like, you know, just as an actual fact, like, you know, I feel like I've learned so much from him and like his like, you know, just like taking a chance on like some random person who emailed him was, you know, unbelievable. And, you know, like, I just feel like, you know, there's people that I know that I'll email and like won't get back to me. You know what I mean? Like it's so it's, you know, I think, you know, there's so much luck involved in the film industry. And so like, so I would never sit here and say like, oh yeah, it was because I was such a good writer, you know, anybody who succeed, you know, I feel like it's easy for people to kind of like, you know, after having like some sort of, not even like success, but like just something happens that's good, or, you know, you move forward, that you can create this sort of narrative saying like, well, it was because of this and this, and kind of piece together random things and say that's why. But, you know, in reality, it's just like a bunch of random things that happen. And yes, I was prepared and I was ready and all those kind of things. But, you know, it's, you know, I think, you know, for like anybody who's listening, who's like, you know, trying to like get a script made or get like, it's probably not your fault that, you know, like that the screenplay is not, you know, going into production. Like it's, you know, and I think that's hard though to accept. But I also think like once you do accept it and, you know, kind of understand, like have like sort of like a semi, like kind of like Zen demeanor about it all, I think it makes the whole process that much more enjoyable and actually, you know, maybe even more fruitful. So,
you know, you're right about people not getting back to you on emails. Like I have friends that I've known for like 10 years, won't respond to an email. So, you know, and I'll email somebody, you know, I found their website, just to ask them a question or maybe, you know, talk to them about coming on the podcast. Right away, they'll respond in a heartbeat. And I'm always like, what, you know, what the hell is that? You know, why?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's hard to, and I feel like, but what that did is, you know, like I feel like I've always been like relatively generous with my time, but I feel like, you know, because of, well, like I just feel like I always use that as an example of like I'm never like too important or too good or too busy or too whatever to like respond back. Like I'm like, even if I can't help the person or like it's not a thing, like, you know, like that I'm in a position to, you know, like it is like a random, like somebody just, you know, like I always try to like, and if not like always do it, like always at least try to like give some sort of response, no matter how short it might be, because that's like not the norm. And, you know, it's just frustrating to me to think like of how many like people will just stop, like, cause that's the other thing. I mean, as I'm sure, you know, and anybody, you know, like people like who like are interested in this world, that it's just like, it takes so much persistence and so much like, just like, you know, it's not even about like not taking no for an answer or not, like, it's like just like not just being completely like debilitatingly like defeated by rejection and just like indifference. That's the problem. Like I would rather deal with rejection, honestly, than indifference or, you know, somebody just being like, oh, I don't know, you know, like just like whatever, like I'm not going to respond to that. Like I'd rather have somebody say like, no, this is a terrible screenplay, you're stupid, than just like not just kind of be like, hey, what's going on? And I feel like that happens more often is like nobody wants to like say no, or nobody wants to like take a position, because then, they're accountable. And, that's tough. Like I see that a lot in film programming for myself. Like, I have to like tell filmmakers that I have a relationship with every year. There's a handful where I have to make a phone call that's not a positive phone call. It's saying I can't find a spot for your film in the program this year. But I feel like out of respect for that person, out of respect for that relationship, you got to kind of like own up to it and say, yeah, like here's the feedback I have. Like here, I wish it, wish it could have been different. But, I feel like a lot of times like people aren't willing to sort of like take that responsibility. And I think that creates sort of an environment where it's okay to like just ignore stuff or kick stuff down the line to somebody else take care of it. And, I don't know. I'm not saying I'm a saint for doing it, but it's just like that's how I want to be treated, So I feel like the least I can do is try to like put that out in sort of a pay it forward style.
Well, when House of a Thousand Corpses came out, Sid Haig, who was in the movie, actually said what we wanted was either people to love it or hate it. So at the advanced screenings of it, he said, they gave out those feedback forms, and he said anytime they had somebody love it or hate it, they're like, that's great. What they hated to see, though, was somebody giving it like a 5 out of 10. It's just like, this movie wasn't good or bad. I didn't feel, one way or the other. He's like, we want to get you out of that indifference and push you to one extreme or the other.
Yeah, totally. And I totally agree with that. It's like you just want a reaction. I think so much about film and art and, anything really, most things, I guess, is, that you want somebody to like just like be engaged or aware, or, in marketing too. It's like you want to make an impression. Ideally like a positive impression, but, yeah, I think you could kind of apply that across the board.
Yeah, very true. I've seen that too in screenplays that I've been asked to give feedback on. I'm always trying to there was a saying one time, a screenwriting teacher once told me. I believe it was maximum value, maximum entertainment. And he said if that maximum entertainment ends up taking you to these extremes, then so be it. Like you've seen, for instance, the Hatchet films. I don't know if you've seen the Hatchet films, but they're sort of like a splatterhouse type film. There's a lot of gore, a lot of bloodshed. Some people just don't get those, movies. But, guys like me, I'm like, hey, this is freaking hilarious.
Yeah. No, I love genre films. Like, I feel like those, I would much rather watch a bad genre film than a mediocre, kind of narrative like drama, that like might have more prestige or might have a name actor or something like that. And believe me, like I watch a lot of movies that don't get, like a release, because I pre-screen for Sundance, I program for Seattle, and then also like, there's a couple other film festivals that like I'm like a friend of the, like kind of like, hey, this might look, or what do you think, like get a question like, what do you think of this movie, or what, like that kind of thing. Plus, on Twitter, like I get people that send me Vimeo links all the time, which I highly encourage. Like I feel like, like to take advantage of all those sort of like network effects that might exist and channels that you might have access to. And I feel like Twitter is like a really great way to like build community and get to know people and kind of like just be part of, no matter what place you're in, even around the world, part of like the conversation around, indie film and what's happening. And, it's just, yeah, I feel like there's like, it's about like participating in the process.
I've always said that Twitter is one of the best, or if not the best, networking tools I've ever seen. I've met so many people because of Twitter and just, keeping that social part of social media. Because, if I want to talk to somebody, I'll follow them. I will make sure to send them a tweet, talk about, something off their bio. I hate when people follow me and either don't say anything or they immediately try to get me to do something for them. Like, hey, Dave, check out my social media link, my crowdfunding link. Can you retweet this? And I'm like, I don't even know who you are. Yep. Like, it's ludicrous.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's a great point that, so many people, especially, and this is kind of like about, indie film marketing or crowdfunding or, anything that involves like kind of like a transactional relationship, is that, people want to go from like 0 to 60 immediately. That like, as soon as like somebody connects with something or fans something or likes or whatever, the, sort of like the metric is, or the, the standard is on whatever platform, right? Like they immediately are like, hey, do this thing or do that thing. Or now that I've got your attention, sign up for these 5 newsletters that I have, and it's just overwhelming because, a lot of people are doing that. And, everybody doesn't have to be a pundit, and everybody doesn't have to be, like, I think it's great to have opinions about stuff, but, sometimes it's good to listen. Sometimes, like, I feel like that's sort of like the key. Like, if I just say, like, is there a key to like social media engagement? I would say it's being a good listener. It's not being a good tweeter. It's not being a good, like, meme maker or GIF creator or like any of that stuff. Yeah, that helps, right? But it's like, if you're not listening to like the tone and sort of like the scale or like the, sort of like where the conversation's going, you're going to just like come in, you're going to be that person at a party that like, like barges in and it's like, hey, it's like you're wearing a toga and it's a, it's a wake or something. Right. And nobody, like I always like use like sort of an analogy of like Twitter and social media in general, just kind of being like an extension of a cocktail party. And, sometimes you talk to one person, sometimes you talk to a group of people, sometimes you talk to everyone that's in your room. But, it's like you have to know appropriate, like times to like when to do those, like when to have the bullhorn out and when to just, or when to direct message. Like it's, yeah. And I think it is like, I absolutely agree with you about Twitter being such a great tool, especially for people in, kind of like freelance or creative kind of roles or content creators or whatever that, kind of those kind of groups look like. Or, I think Twitter is so much better than LinkedIn or even Facebook, that it's such a professional, like the way I kind of set it up is like, Facebook is kind of like my broad, like sometimes I'll share family stuff, sometimes I'll share, but like I actually even don't spend that much time like other than for clients, like for my personal Facebook. Whereas I spend a lot of time on Twitter, like reading news and following, like interacting with people and sharing stuff about other people's projects or local, like Pacific Northwest filmmaker stuff. LinkedIn, again, like kind of same with Facebook, but it's like even less personal. It's more businessy. And Instagram is just like pictures of my kids, and I think like each of those channels have different content styles and they have different tones. And, so like all of those things like that, it's hard to teach. Like you can't really necessarily learn what works and what doesn't work from like an article that's like top 5 ways to become a, top engager on Twitter or something. Like you just have to like be part of the conversation and be part of the community. And if you're not willing to take the time to do that, then you can't expect, the community to embrace you when you have an ask for them or a need or, cause then it'll seem like you're just, just coming in and, just with your hand out. And, that's never good. That's, interpersonally or, yeah. I could go on and on about like, sort of like my thinking on sort of like what underlies good social media engagement and like community and communication. But, it's really not that difficult. It's like, would you, what you would do in real life, like in the real world, it's not that much different.
I was reading a very good book by Gary Vaynerchuk. I don't know. Jab, right hook, which is, give, ask. And one of the things that Gary was always talking about was, social listening, and stop always using it as like a bullhorn, but actually ask, hey, what's your biggest problem in business? Hey, what could be better in this? And then, once he would, give solutions or give this, then he would ask something of them. So it would be about an 80-20 ratio of, asking to giving. I'm sorry, giving to asking. So, giving 80% of the time, asking, 20% of the time. And he, that's what he's been using. And, I mean, it's just, when I see things like that, immediately, like, people just, immediately joining in, like, hey, click this link, or, hey, follow me, or this or that. I just tune it out. One thing I just got into recently was Instagram. I have gotten so big in Instagram, and I never really thought about it that much. And I finally figured out how to use it the way I want to use it, and now it's almost become like it's pushing out Twitter as my favorite social media platform. So now I'm just like I'm big on Twitter and Instagram right now.
Yeah, well, and I think like Instagram is just going to keep growing, and I think you're going to see a lot of, activity on Snapchat, and things are just going to get more and more visual, and and shorter, and emojis, and like all of like, it's like you could either say like, I mean, I'm 30, I'll be 40 years old in January, and I'm not a digital native, I'm not a millennial, but I'm also, like a lifelong learner, I guess I would describe myself. And so I feel like there's a lot of people who are kind of like, social media, that's, for kids, or that's for this or that, or it's, not relevant, or I don't need to be on social media. And yeah, maybe somebody doesn't, who's like Wes Anderson. Like, it's not going to, the film director is not going to help him necessarily to be on social media, or Sofia Coppola, like somebody who's like already established kind of in, like in that last kind of like golden period of, the 3-picture deal, and, kind of like, having your way paid by studios and mini majors. Whereas like now, I feel like if you're, again, like a creative, like freelancer or filmmaker or content creator or whatever, again, like any of those kind of groups, I think it's essential to at least have a presence there and be part of the community. And, I think your instincts are right on the money as far as like, like Instagram and, like Snapchat. And, I have to learn, like every day, like I ask our intern, not every day, I don't want, cause it's a big ask, but like at least once a week, I can say that honestly. Like I ask our intern who's 24 years old to tell me like something new about Snapchat. Like, what do I not know about Snapchat? Or what do I need to, like, what's a new thing on Instagram that I need to be aware of? Or, cause I don't know all of that, and it's hard to like keep track of all that stuff. You're not going to get it, just by getting a couple e-newsletters from, social media business, like, or whatever, right? It's like, I feel like it comes like, it's like face-to-face kind of like, tell me what I don't know. And I feel like that, applies to anything. I think it's just the right way to learn and stay in the mix.
Yeah, very true. Because when I see social media strategies for filmmakers, usually what they try to do is they just say, listen, they'll do it themselves. They'll when they're crowdfunding, they try to do that themselves. And you're like, I'll answer it as it comes in. And, one of the things that I've always said is, you need to have a better plan than that. It's sort of like,
oh yeah,
it's sort of like if, hey, if something bad happens, on production, we'll figure out a way. Forget planning, forget all that pre-planning stuff. Who needs it?
Yeah. And that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yes. And that's very true. And, as we're talking about, social strategies, you've worked with a lot of, really great companies. You work with HBO, and you've also worked with one of my favorites, which is Draft House Films.
Oh, yeah.
And, how did you end up, meeting with some of these companies and getting to work with them?
In HBO's case, it was just a referral, word of mouth. Like, we haven't really, Smart House Creative hasn't really done any advertising yet, other than like some promoted posts on Facebook and some, like some Facebook ads, but not more than I think like $250 total over, recently. And that's changing in January. Like, we're sponsoring a party at Sundance in January, and like 2016 forward is more like, we're going to take a more, as far as like marketing goes for us, we had been mostly focusing on content marketing. We still will be, but we're going to do a little bit more traditional kind of marketing as well. So, but up until then, it was just word of mouth. So, just HBO was doing a big premiere for one of their shows, Looking, here in Seattle, and one of our clients is $3 Bill Cinema, which is the LGBTQ film nonprofit film organization that they produce the Seattle Lesbian and Gay Film Festival. So we've been working with them for 2 years, and we're like their agency of record now. And so it was like, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to do something with $3 Bill. Like, how do we pull this off? And it was just like, okay, you guys got to work with Smart House. And so we did like a kind of a live tweet tour with one of the stars from Looking, all over Capitol Hill, going to like gay friendly businesses and just being in the community. And it was a lot of fun. And that was a great experience. And then with Draft House, that relationship developed because I had been doing the social media and kind of like broad general, kind of digital strategy for Amira and Sam, which I mentioned earlier, director Sean Mullen, West Point grad. So, that was just like a really nice fit. It was like, I'm going to, help these guys out on their film. And then that was before they even got distribution from Draft House. Like that was still like, as they were kind of like on the festival circuit. And then when that happened, it became like now it's like, let's rally the, circle the wagons. How are we going to? So it was really great working with Draft House, who had many more resources and a lot of people in the mix. And, there was some like controversy about some of the costumes in the film, like with the hijab and how it was worn with Amira's character. And, so there was like some like, sort of like PR style crisis control. And like, it was really interesting. There was a lot, like I learned a lot from that whole, because they were, doing some tug screenings and doing some, and one of the actors in the film in a supporting role is Paul Wesley, who's in the Vampire Diaries. And, I wasn't aware really of how big of a star he was on, in general, but especially on social media. But his Twitter following is like, it's, probably close to 4 million people by now. I think it was like 3.6 million or something at the time. So anytime we would tweet something that he would either retweet, like that he interacted with somehow, it would just drive engagement through the roof. And people, like, if he were to retweet a tweet about like signing up for Amira and Sam's e-newsletter, people would be retweeting and favoriting that tweet, like, I would say like at least probably a month after it was originally sent out. So, it's just crazy. And that really, to me, like demonstrates, kind of the power of social media and, kind of thinking about how that integrates into your casting strategy. Because I think in the past, it used to be about, sort of what is the international sales or the bankability of a star overseas. So it's like, can this star make money for us when we, pre-sales overseas or something? And I think that's still, part of the equation. But I think now, if you had two actors and they were both, two like lead female role, right? And they're both great, and everything else is equal, but one of them has 2 million Twitter followers, and one has like, or isn't on Twitter, has like 100, or just doesn't focus on social media. And like I said, like everything else is equal. Like there's not like a difference in talent or anything. I absolutely would hire the one with 2 million Twitter followers, because that is going to come and, into play when the film is on the festival circuit, when it's in release, and it's going to make a difference. So, I think all that stuff is now, we're starting to see that built into some of the strategies, but that's kind of like how that, that whole part of that, came together.
Yeah, I was talking about crowdfunding before with some podcast guests, and one of the crowdfunding specialists actually said that's one of the things he always looks at was he talks to the directors, talks to the producers, and says whoever you have casted in this film, I would like to see their social media platform as well, because, there's some people who say, no, I'm not on social media at all. And then there's others who, some actors and actresses who take it upon themselves and are like, look, we got to promote ourselves. So they have the Instagram, they have the Twitter, they have the Facebook, and they have a pretty good following. And, just to go back to Gary Vaynerchuk, one thing he also said was width versus depth. And he said, likes and comments and, retweets are all with. And he said the depth is where you come in, where you have like that engagement, and then you have that conversion rate of them signing up for newsletters and everything else. And one thing I took away from it is he said, go 1 inch wide and a mile deep.
I like that. Yeah, I've heard similar. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with that, sort of general philosophy about, like really finding, I mean, it speaks, I don't know if it was Vaynerchuk who said this or who this was. Maybe it was Seth Godin or somebody like that. But like the idea of true fans, like finding those true fans that are out there, your ambassadors, like with the movie that Smart House just acquired called Chatty Catties. Like, I feel like there are people out there that love this movie, and they're going to be great ambassadors for the film. And there are people that love cats, obviously. And when those two kind of Venn diagrams overlap, I feel like there's the potential, at least, for, that sort of like alchemy that happens sometimes with social media, where it becomes like people start sharing stuff and talking about stuff. And I think it's going to be, potentially divisive film. Like, it won the jury prize at SIFF and sold out its screenings. But some people were still like, oh, that movie, like talking cats, like I just don't, some people didn't like it at all. Whereas other people thought it was the best thing ever. And that to me is like a really good sign. And that speaks to what we just talked about earlier in the podcast. When you said about like, Sid Haig, you either want people to love something or hate something. You don't want them to be indifferent or ambivalent. And I think that is really key, especially when it comes to distribution.
So, Brad, one of the other questions, I had for you was, how do filmmakers, approach Smart House Creative? Do you sort of find them, or do they find you, or is it like a mixture of both?
Well, I think because we're so new in the space that it's more us finding them. Because like I said, I see a lot of movies sort of in the, the film equivalent of galleys for publishing. And, these are picture lock or rough cuts, and you get a good, like it's a, you can evaluate, I feel pretty good, like with my gut instinct about being able, like once a film has its picture locked, I don't care if it's missing, doesn't have color correction, doesn't have finished sound, it's got a temp score, all these other things, like, that doesn't matter because the story is there. And if the story's not going to change, I feel pretty confident saying I can evaluate, the film on its merits, those most important merits, the story. So, up until now, it's been like there's just like a, sort of like a wealth of films. But I think like once Chatty Catties gets out, and I think once, that film that we produced in-house called 13 Chambers, which is a genre kind of supernatural anthology directed by 13 different female filmmakers from the Seattle area, which I'm super excited about. I've seen some early rough cuts of those films, and they're just blowing my mind. Like I'm so excited to see see the rest of them, but it's kind of a great. Yeah, it's great. It's like Christmas morning every time like a new filmmaker brings in the computer with the rough cut, and it's like, all right, here's what I got so far. And it's like, oh my gosh, show me more. I can't wait to see the rest. So like we'll be releasing that one ourselves as well. And, it's like once you, I think, understand sort of like the infrastructure and have, some trusted guides in place to help navigate that landscape, because it's sort of like the Wild West right now with film distribution. So what I would like is for Smart House to sort of develop into what might be considered like the filmmaker's distributor. And I kind of see like the deal that we worked out with Chatty Catties. We have an ownership stake in the film, Smart House does. So there's no agency problem. It's not like we're just like licensing it and we're going to, distribute it. And as soon as it, like it becomes part of our catalog, like it's like we're in it for the long haul, and we're working very closely with the filmmakers. And, the quote that Pablo Valencia, who's the co-writer and director of the film, gave for the IndieWire article. Like, when he first sent that to me, I was like blushing because I was like, oh my gosh, like it was like really like that's exactly like what I wanted, to convey to film is like, this is a home for filmmakers, because as a filmmaker myself, or producer, like in that kind of space, I know how difficult it is. And I know how unfair a lot of, the deals are that are offered to a lot of filmmakers, which is what drives them, honestly, like, and truthfully, into a DIY release or into like a kind of like a hastily cobbled together, sort of like, let's just get this out there. And, it's like they're kind of left hanging. And so, I think eventually, like, I'm like, as far as like how to, I would love for filmmakers to send us their films at, the picture lock stage, and, we can evaluate it. But I think we're going to be very, very, we're still sort of like Chatty Catties, I think, is a really interesting, sort of model template for what a smart house film looks like. And Ryan, my business partner, and I, talk at length about what does a smart house film look like. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, we'll know it when we see it, but also, it's not something that you could, it's not like a carbon copy or an imitation of what's playing at the multiplex, because then, people, like, there's not like a moral imperative necessarily to go see an independent film. It's not like that's like a marketing hook for anyone, unfortunately, I don't mean to burst anyone's bubbles, but I'm just saying, like, my parents in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, like, don't give a care if it's an independent film or not. They don't care how it was made. They just care if it's a good movie that they want to see. So, by trying to find movies that, are comparable to, it's an indie, it's an indie Taken 3, or, it's an indie, insert, Aloha or something, right? Like, that doesn't do any good. And I feel like it just kind of sets you up for failure. So it's like, that's why, like, a movie like Chatty Catties, which is so, like, just, eclectic and risky in my opinion, but like I said, it still managed to sell out 2 screenings and win the jury prize at a major film festival that was its world premiere. I feel like that's like that's like a risk worth taking in my book. And I feel like that's the whole reason to get into film distribution or filmmaking, is to take those kind of risks, because you don't want to just like throw your, like kind of just be like another voice among like a, chattering crowd of thousands of people doing the same thing. It's like, ideally, like, you'd want to stand out in a positive way and, kind of be like a beacon in a sense for like what's possible, even if it's not there's never going to be that perfect film, or there's never going to be, that sort of like perfect strategy or whatever. But, again, it's all about learning, and it's about like, continual incremental improvement is kind of how I like to look at it. So that's,
and you're right about the online distribution, because a lot of filmmakers on the previous episode, I had on 2 filmmakers from Canada, and they released their film through VHX. They actually spent years. They actually finished the film in 2012, and they then spent years going to these distributors and asking, hey, what do you have for us? And their answer was, well, it's a comedy. Okay, who's in it? We don't know any of these people. Forget it. And one of the guys, I think Bob Woosley, he actually said, one of the things he learned was, if you're going to do a comedy, an indie comedy, you have to have some kind of name, whether it's like a Patton Oswalt or, a Bill Murray, but if you do horror is a lot easier to sell.
Yeah. Well, that's in no small part why, like, if we were going to produce a film, our first film, which we did, 13 Chambers, aligns with the horror genre. Like, that wasn't an accident, and I totally agree with that. And I feel like, you can't compromise artistic integrity, but at the same time, you also want to be completely and fully aware of the realities of the marketplace. And I think that's like what often happens, is you either have one or the other. You've got a producer who just cares about product and, So they create something that's kind of a cookie cutter thing. Maybe it'll make money, which is good, but it's not really adding anything to the artistic conversation. And then on the other hand, you've got, a filmmaker that is just only cares about, his or her vision and doesn't necessarily take into account that film exists in a commercial marketplace. It's not like an art museum or, unless you're making like a 12-hour experimental, kind of, visual art thing, which is fine. Go ahead and do it. If you can find somebody to pay for, I'm trying to remember maybe it's Christian Barclay. I don't remember the exact name of the person, but the artist who made that 24-hour film, The Clock, I think like that consists of just like, images of time in film. Like that's I would love to see that. And people pay huge amounts of money to have it screened and to own a print of it. And it's kind of a one-of-a-kind thing. But, outside of those like examples or like a Matthew Barney, sort of like hybrid experimental / just weirdo experiment, those opportunities don't exist for most independent, if not all independent filmmakers. So you got to find that balance point. You have to find that sweet spot, and it's tough. I'm not saying that I or Smart House or, anybody that I know has like the solution or the perfect solution, or it's like, I feel like we're all learning, but I feel like the more that we're able to share through channels like social media or being on a podcast like this or, connecting at a film festival or something like that, kind of share what we've learned and the experiences. Like, I feel like that's going to help, the next project that somebody makes or 2 projects down the road. I think you're going to see that sort of cumulative positive impact, but that's what I hope for at least. But it's tough. Independent filmmaking, like anything right now, it's like just like a tough world. Yeah. It just is. It's just you got to be a real scrapper. You got to be a real hustler, I guess. In a positive, like not like where you're like scamming somebody, but where you're just like always like trying to like make an improvement somewhere.
Yeah, I concur. I also, Brett, I have a feeling that in the next coming years, I think everything's going to come back on the upswing. I just have this feeling. I can just see the economy improving here and there. I think it's going to come back. And I think the people are going to have a lot more disposable income. And, hopefully some of this stuff will be eased up. So, but at least that's my hope.
Yeah, sure. That'd be great.
So, Brad, I know, we've been talking for almost an hour and I know you're busy. I had one fan question come in that I really wanted to make sure to ask you particularly. This is actually from Bob Woosley, who I just was mentioning about, who was on the podcast episode before you. And he said, his question is, with so many platforms out there, where do you start when planning a social media strategy?
Well, that is a great question. And so here's like, I want to like actually like give a legitimate response to this that somebody could actually, take action on in a practical kind of way. So I think the first thing you have to figure out is like the first response is it depends. And it really does. And it depends on your project. It depends on your audience. And I feel like you have to really know your project very, very well. So if you're the filmmaker, the producer, it's like that you should. So that's good. You've got that information already. And then based on like what you learned from your crowdfunding campaign, if you did one, or what you've learned from, sort of like work in progress screenings, if you've done any of those, which I, find to be like very helpful, not like where you have to have like a formal audience feedback survey kind of thing, but it's more like, friends and family or trusted advisors, or, kind of confidant kind of thing. And, it's like you're figuring out like what your audience looks like and who they are, or like who they might align with, out in the world, right? Like maybe developing some personas. And, then I think it really comes down to how much capacity you have to manage each of these channels, because, each of the channels, like the worst thing you could do is, set it up so that whatever you post on Facebook also gets automatically tweeted, which also, you take a picture and post it on Instagram, and then you also just like say like, you know, hit all those buttons that say like post to Facebook and post to Twitter and post to Tumblr. You know, like it's like that's like the absolute wrong way to do it, and that's a good indicator that you're like stretched too thin, and you want to like really focus on, you know, one or two channels. And before I go into more about that, and I want to make this like a huge like, you know, mini class or something like that, but you know, I think you can get a lot of traction out of a hashtag. So for instance, like I'll say like, I'll kind of like give like a case study style example here with our film 13 Chambers. So in that case, like, you know, it would be real easy to say like, oh, we're going to make a Facebook page for this movie, and then we're going to make a Twitter account for this movie because people are going to want to follow it. We're going to make a Instagram account because, you know, we have to have a presence on all these different places, right? Well, you know, if you already have an established, you know, like the filmmaker has an established presence, or the actors do, or, you know, the company who produced it does, like if all those things are already in place, and one of the things that we talk about a lot at Smart House is this kind of idea of filmmaker first. So, you know, so like in Bob's case, it's more about positioning him as a filmmaker who has multiple projects, you know, in the pipeline. He's got this one that he's working on right now, but, you know, there's two more coming down the pike, and it's really, you know, neck and neck which one's going to get made. But, you know, it's filmmaker first because those projects have a limited shelf life, whereas, you know, Bob's career is going to hopefully, you know, be, you know, much longer lasting than any one single project. So, you know, based on that, you know, I would say like, you know, for 13 Chambers, like we're doing most of our engagement via the hashtag. So anytime like I personally tweet anything, or Smart House does, or one of the filmmakers or whatever, we just make sure we include the hashtag. And then you could go on to apps or, you know, platforms like Tagboard or Hash Addit. There's like a whole bunch if you search like hashtag like search engines. And what they'll do is you can embed this then in your website, or, you know, because I think every film should definitely have a website. Like you need to have a website. So like, you know, and, you know, that's like sort of like, because eventually you're going to want to embed your VOD, you know, kind of Vimeo on demand, or VHX, or Gumroad, or if you do it through Quiver, like, I mean, there's all these options, right? But you want to have your, like you want to have like an anchor. And I think, you know, the film's website should be the anchor. Now, if that is the filmmaker, and like, then it could be like, you know, bobwoolsey.com/film title, right? Like it doesn't like, you don't have to create brand new things for every single project that you do. You should try to like integrate them. And this is where the digital strategy comes into play. Integrate them as well as you can, and as smartly as you can. So again, it's like, so for 13 Chambers, right? We're going to have a website, 13 Chambers Movie. And then the film eventually, like after, you know, we'll try to do a theatrical release to whatever extent that we are able to, you know, through independent film theaters and everything. And then once that revenue stream has diminished to a certain point, then we'll make it available through our website, through the filmmakers' websites, you know, everywhere you can embed. Because I found actually that like one of the key, like the leading indicators, I think, for like all the data that you can get through Vimeo on demand is the number of times that the embedded player, like the trailer, gets loaded, seems to be at least indicative of a higher, like I'm not a statistician, but I do understand statistics. So I'm not saying, you know, that this correlation means causation, right? Like you got to take it all with a grain of salt. But the more times that the embedded player gets loaded, you know, like when those are the highest, those numbers are the highest, it's also, you know, correlates to a higher number of sales or rentals. So I think the more places you can have the trailer embedded through the Vimeo, you know, sort of embedded, you know, that code that you can get, that's like a really strong tactic when it comes to like your online kind of sales strategy. So, but beyond that, though, all the other social channels that we've already established, my personal Twitter, Smart House's Twitter, Smart House's Facebook page, my personal Facebook page, Smart House's Instagram, my personal Instagram, Smart House's Snapchat, that's where we're going to be promoting and pushing the film via the hashtag 13 Chambers, and then kind of aggregating all of that content that's out there to see, what kind of traction we get, and using tools like TweetReach and Topsy, and there's a couple other free ones that are out there that will allow you to kind of see kind of like who's talking about the film via this hashtag, and who to follow up with, and what kind of insights you can glean from that. So, as far as it comes to like picking, a platform, like what I would say is like go with what you already have established, and work the hashtag into it. And if you don't have anything established, then I would say start with your own personal channels first. So establish yourself on Twitter first, establish yourself on Instagram first, and then, work the film into that, because that's going to be the sustainable way to do it. And I think a lot of people want to jump in right away and be like, well, we gotta create a Twitter handle for this film, and it's got to be, 13 Chambers movie, for Twitter. But what that means then is that you also have to like provide relevant content on that channel for the audience, because if you encourage somebody to follow your 13 Chambers Twitter handle or Instagram account or whatever, then that audience is going to expect something beyond just, hey, everyone, here's our trailer, here's our poster, here's our, here's where we're playing next on the festival circuit. Hey, guess what? We're available for VOD. Because those are all things that you can say on any channel. Doesn't matter. You can do promoted posts and, ads on any channel. It doesn't have to be a specific film channel. So, I think eventually it gets to a point where you no longer have anything relevant to share about that film that's not redundant and not just purely promotional. And then people will you'll lose that part of your audience, right? Whereas if you set it up that you are the hub and not the film is the hub, but you as the filmmaker are the hub, and each of your projects are spokes, and those spokes look more like hashtags than actual accounts, then I think what you start doing is you start developing a sustainable framework for, sort of this, sort of new, digital first and sort of like new landscape that it's very fragmented, it's very fractured, and it's ever changing. So, and this is all part of a presentation I gave at the Portland Film Festival in September, this couple months ago, and that we're also giving at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival in January. And it's called basically Bridging the Indie Gap. And the idea is it's a practical guide for independent filmmakers and artists. You don't necessarily have to be a filmmaker. This could apply for a musician or a visual artist or whatever that person's doing. Really practical steps, kind of like what I'm talking about here. So it's not like a loss leader or a content marketing thing. It's going to be, it's going to end up eventually as an ebook that, I'll sell, through, Smart House will sell for like $3.99 or something, and, $3.99, by the way. And it's something that if, you're a filmmaker in Nebraska who has no connections and you're just like, what do I do now? Maybe you can't afford to hire somebody like Smart House, but you could buy this ebook for $3.99 that will have all these templates and all these things that if you take the time to implement them, it'll at least put you in the ballpark for being successful with what you're trying to do, and, lay the groundwork for that sort of eventual success, because there is no overnight sort of social media success for 99% of the people. So never think of yourself as the outlier. You should always think of yourself as the average case. And that will, I think, help you succeed and prepare you for the realities of what that might look like, much better than if you think that you're going to be the person who finances their independent film on their credit card and then sells it at Sundance to Harvey Weinstein.
Just to sort of put a period at the end of that too, some people I know have actually bought followers on social media. So what they'll do is, they'll set it up on like a Sunday, and all of a sudden, the next week they've got 10,000 followers. And at first I was like, how did you do this? And they said, oh, we did a little bit of this and that. And then finally, I asked them, and they admitted, okay, we paid for somebody on Fiverr to, follow us with 1,000 or 10,000 bot accounts that are just, they're not real. There's nothing behind them. They're just they're a photo, a generated username, and the photo was found by a program which just finds photos, plops it in there, and none of this is a real engagement. So now, whatever they send out, nobody even sees it. It's literally like putting it up there for a bunch of automated bots to see.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's a great example of quality versus quantity. And I'm always amazed by when I see accounts with lots and lots of followers. If you ever look at, this isn't every account with a lot of followers, but just do a little anecdotal kind of survey. You see somebody who's got 10,000 followers or this or that, and then you look at their tweets and there's no interaction or engagement at all on any of their tweets. Nobody's even liking something, much less responding, replying, or retweeting or whatever, right? And I think it's foolish. We always tell our clients, when you're looking at social media metrics, and that's something else that I think is really important, is it's not just about good content or community engagement in the sense of community management, where you're hey, I'm just a fun person and I'm good on social media. You really have to see what are the metrics and what are the goals that you're trying to achieve through this engagement and through this content, and what kind of tactics that you're trying. And you never want to look at gross numbers without somehow filtering them. And I feel you always want to look at rates, and you always want to look at per capita kind of interactions. And you'll find that organizations or brands or people that have huge followers almost always have really, really paltry rates of engagement, because there just isn't, people follow, I don't know why I would follow, I don't mean to pick on Pepsi, but why I would follow Pepsi or Walmart, or why I would follow a major brand. I don't know what the incentive is really, even if there's a chance for quote unquote good deals or, whatever, right? It's so these brands have these huge, and I guarantee you, I know as a fact, most huge brands on Facebook and they're constantly promoting every single post, paying to boost the posts and paying for ads, organic engagement on Facebook especially is really, really low, and it's hard to come by. And, you got to have a really focused audience to do it and to make it work. So I think, anybody who looks at kind of I've got a great, I guess your example's perfect. But I feel there's, a number of examples like that where, people get hung up on the number, the volume, and they forget about sort of the whole reason, the goal that they should be aiming at. And that's to get people to actually care about whatever it is that they're working on or doing, and not saying it's the person who has 100 followers, but 50 of them are engaged, compared to a person who has 10,000 followers and 25 of them are engaged. Most people would say, oh, well, this person with 10,000 followers, they're obviously doing something right. I have to listen to their wise counsel, or listen to, give them my money or do whatever, right? I have to follow them, right? Whereas the person with 100 followers with 50 engaged, that's the one that's going to slip through the cracks, but that's where the real engagement is happening. And that's, maybe one of those followers is maybe 10 of those followers are studio executives, and, whatever that person tweets becomes, ends up in the Hollywood Reporter next week, or, so there's all sorts of different influence, levels and types of influence online. So yeah, I think what you described is a great example of be cautious and be skeptical about, social media.
And I remember when I a couple years ago when I was getting into crowdfunding, a person I was talking to actually said, there was a case called the Soulja Boy case, which was Soulja Boy is a rapper, and he had like 3-4 million followers. So on Twitter, and when his new CD was coming out, they're like, well, this thing's going to obviously be number one because he's tweeting about it constantly. It came out, the album, and it didn't do anywhere near what they thought. And they said, wait a minute, how does this guy with 4 million followers, how does he not have the number one album? And they thought, was it piracy? Well, not really. They looked, they didn't think it was that. They ended up deciding that it was they're more interested in hearing about like his thoughts about rap beefs and other lyrics and this and that than they are about his new album.
Yeah, right.
And so all of that was, sort of for naught. And there are, people that are obsessed with those vanity analytics, those vanity metrics, I've got, 20,000 Twitter followers. I actually did a crowdfunding webinar. I used to do it more regularly, but we haven't done it in a while. We actually did a crowdfunding webinar. It was free. It was on a Google Hangout. And somebody actually said, hey, we have this star that we've signed. She's an actress. And, she's got a huge social media following, but we don't get a lot of conversions. And we looked at her photos, and basically it's a lot of, modeling, lingerie type stuff that, guys follow her to see that so they can hit like or to, retweet or tell her how hot she is. They're not there to sort of, invest in any of her projects or buy any of her other stuff. They just want to, be there clicking on that stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I think that's, sort of, again, like sort of that, like, the fallacy of, social media, like the silver bullet of social media. It's not going to solve all your problems. Like, I think you got to use it effectively, and I think there are great ways to use it effectively. And I actually think Facebook ads are like a really effective way, especially if like you are able to target them and you can get your like your click rates, like as far as like how much you're paying for clicks, down, like, and always like driving, people, like, so it's not like you're paying for impressions, but you're actually like driving to an actual goal and putting a pixel on the site so when you're converting, like all these things, which like are like actually like take like some thought process, and that's where the real value can be had and the real value can be added. But so many people aren't willing really to take or even to like think about the need for that, or like why you have to connect all those dots for like a proper social media strategy or an overall digital strategy, like how all those pieces fit together. So it's not rocket science, but I feel like it definitely requires somebody on your team. It doesn't have to be a paid consultant, but it has like somebody should like really think about it. Usually producer in most cases, but that doesn't usually happen. So then it, when a film gets its first festival acceptance, or, they're going to try a DIY release, or they've got a distributor that's like going to quote unquote distribute them, but they're not going to put any money or effort toward, marketing or promoting that. And it's, it's really up to the filmmaker. So, what are you going to do then? Like these are all questions that will eventually come to bear, like they will eventually like have an impact on you. So you might as well think about them and figure them out in the beginning, and then realize, well, we don't need this. We need this. We got to put more money in toward this. We don't have enough for this. Put it in your budget instead of like being at the end when you cross the finish line because you've completed your film, when you realize that it's just like the first lap, that you're like all of a sudden like, oh, we have 3 more laps that we have to run with this film and we have no money left and everybody's burned out and we've called in all our favors. Then who's going to see your movie? And that's just the reality, because there's so much content being produced and the means of production are so like the bar is so low for people to get something made. And, it's just a flood of bad stuff out there. And, if you've got a good movie, people should be able to see it. And that's, it's not, on an audience, because you can't expect them to search everything out. Like if you just put your movie on VHX or on Vimeo on demand and be like, all right, there it is. Like I've leveled the playing field. Well, that's like the first step. like you got to show people, like you got to lead people to that content, and you've got to encourage them, you've got to convert them, and you've got to turn them into fans, and you've got to, bring them along for your next project, and, show them some value and give, provide, a community value and, all that stuff. So it's, if you think about it too much, it can seem overwhelming, but, that's kind of like what these conversations are about, is to, hopefully try to like break it down so that somebody's like, okay, if I approach it from, this logical step-by-step kind of thing, it's like, it's not as overwhelming or as crazy as it sounds. It actually can be done by somebody who's just getting, but maybe that's not the filmmaker, but maybe it's, a student intern, or maybe it's your, uncle's, your cousin or whatever. It's like, who's, 23 years old and knows everything about Snapchat, and that's where you're going to find your biggest audience. So anyway, we could probably go on and on.
We could go on and on. Because, I was just going to say, one of the things that I realized from crowdfunding my last film was I would definitely, and for the next time I plan to crowdfund, I have a team in mind. And
there you go.
One of the things is, obviously I'll sort of be like, the dictator, but you got to have, a person who's in charge of the crowdfunding campaign. You also have to have a person who's in charge of the social media. And then from that person, I would put like one person's in charge of Twitter. I have a person in charge of Facebook. I have a person in charge of Instagram. And if you can't, let's just say you can't build that dream team, you can't pay everybody, that's excellent advice you had. Just find somebody who maybe will work for free, or who's a relative, a friend, somebody you bumped it on the street, and maybe they can help you out in some way. And maybe you can offer them something on, however you want to compensate them. It takes a village to raise a child, right, Brad?
Oh yeah, that's for sure. Yep. Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. All that stuff you just said. And it's like, yeah, it's never going to be your perfect team. It's never, you're always, the plan's never going to be perfect. And once you implement it and you start executing it, half of it's going to go out the window because something changes or somebody gets sick or what, you just got to just be like prepared and just move on and, just make it work somehow. And if it doesn't work, then, set that project aside and focus on the next one. Like I have a very I'm not too precious about any one project or any one sort of thing, because I know that so many things influence the success or failure of those projects that, you just have to focus on the things that you can control, hope for some good luck on the things that you can't, and then just really, without sounding too Pollyannish about it, but like just try to stay positive about it through the whole process. And, and you'll find like, even if the project doesn't succeed or like something goes wrong midway or whatever, like you may find that some of your collaborators that you brought on board end up being, key team members in the next project, or you helped, it's like, you just never know. And I think that's kind of like one of the really cool things about a lot of this randomness that we kind of discuss, is that you just never know. So you should always be open to those possibilities.
Some of those struggles could maybe lead to a better opportunity or lead to a better discovery. There was a book I was actually just reading. I have to finish reading it, called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And
that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about. The New England Patriots actually distributed that to all their players this year, and
cool.
to teach them all about adversity and everything else, and that they do pretty well in football.
Yeah, right.
Brad, sometime hopefully we can sit down again. I can have you back on the show if you'd be willing to come back.
Oh, for sure. I feel like I'm losing my voice right now, so probably good timing. I'd love to come back. That'd be great.
Oh, excellent. So Brad, where can people find you at online?
So you can find, Smart House is at smarthousecreative.com, all one word, just as it's, spelled normally. I'm on Twitter at JBWILKE. Smart House is on Twitter and Instagram at Team Smart House. And I'm also on Instagram at JB Wilke. That's another, just one more little piece of advice, is if you can standardize all of your handles so that like people don't have to like remember 3 different handles across your Twitter, Instagram, whatever else you might have, like try to, like, if you can, make them the same thing. So it's not like it takes a lot of the guesswork out of the whole process if somebody is trying to tag you at a conference or at a Q&A or whatever. So, and then, Smart House is on Facebook, and, you can find us. We have a blog too, where we do a lot of, guest posts from people like filmmakers, talk about their experiences. And, so anyway, that's, we're out there. Like, I'm usually not like, I'm a good promoter, but I sometimes, like, I'm just like, if you're interested, like, you'll be able to find us. Just Team Smart House, Smart House Creative, JB Wilke. But yeah, I encourage, like, and would actually welcome anybody to tweet questions at me on Twitter, or to, email Brad. Oh yeah. I mean, that's, another great way. Brad, BRAD at smarthousecreative.com is my email address. So, if anybody who's listening has, questions that I might be able to answer, like in an email or by, sharing a link to something, please get in touch. Like, I feel like I'm always, like, trying to, broaden that community and, and do, help out if I can in, those, like, really minor kind of ways. But, so yeah, tweet me your questions, email your questions, and, I'll really do my best to get you some actual, like, practical answers. So.
And I will make sure to link to all that in the show notes, everybody. You can find me at davebullis.com, and Twitter, it's at Dave_Bullis. Brad, I want to say thank you very much for coming on. This has been a fantastic episode for all those people who were, confused about social media and all that other, the digital media. I hopefully, they listen to this, and I hope they gained a lot, from this, or listen to it again, everybody, if you're still, if you're still not quite sure, because Brad said a lot of key points in this interview that I can't stress enough of how to build that digital market.
Well, glad to. And I'm, I really, like I said, like, trying to be as practical and as, like, straightforward and clear as possible. So, because I feel like there's a lot of, like, anyway, we'll save that for the next episode.
Have a great night, buddy, and I wish you the best.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dave.
Anytime, buddy. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Find Dave at davebullis.com. Please make sure to subscribe and share the podcast.